What's my work about? That's the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? It's about opening to the mystery, about releasing everything we think we know, and about an exploration of these two qualities through the physical, through the interior, through the mind, and really through reality as a whole. My name's Craig Mallett, and welcome to the Aware, Relaxed, Connected podcast. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. It's been, I guess, a couple of weeks since I last recorded one, but I wanted to get on and do an episode that is now in almost direct opposition to the previous episode where I was talking about condensing and letting go and all of that. And this is going to be about the expansive nature and the wood energy in the 5 phases, 5 movements, 5 elements theory, which is called wuxing in Chinese. So to frame this, I really want to give, first of all, a bit of an idea about these quote unquote elements as they exist. The main thing to understand about them is they're not about a list of correspondences. You're not taking a list of, oh, wood is associated to this, wood is associated to that, wood is associated to that. The main thing about these elemental movements is that they are, let's call them essential, that they are talking about a particular movement, and all the correspondences that are there arise off the back of that particular movement. So let's look at one of the most basic ones, that you have this idea that the wood element is associated with anger and frustration. When you understand what the wood element does, wood element moves from the center out to an extremity and beyond. That anger and frustration come when this expansion gets constrained. So it's not really 100% accurate to say that wood is anger. Anger is a byproduct of the movement of wood, this expansive movement being constrained, being interfered with. And so all of the other correspondences you can find like that, whether it's like a correspondence in feng shui, in like the environment, they should all talk back to this essence and interaction with this essence. And I want to talk a bit to that now because there's a couple of really interesting associations that it has, particularly that wood gets associated with things like the bigger picture, things like dreams, and things like deities, spirits, and things like this. And so you want to, first of all, start to sit into how this works. So if you have a center, and say that center is you, your physical body, if you want to get a bigger picture of what's going on, when I'm down in the little me, in the Craig, I can only see from Craig's perspective. I can see that right now I'm sitting in a room and whatever else. If I want to get a bigger view of something, I need to get away from where I am now and into something else, like typically get like a higher view of things, right? If I move away from my center and away from the center of the earth too, I go up and out. And the further up and out I get, the more I see, oh, that's actually part of something bigger. That's part of this timeline that I call my life. And it's part of a bigger context too. That is the timeline of the planet and all the people going on and all the rest. So you might think of like how the astronauts go into outer space and look back on the planet and just see one planet. And they're like, whoa, that changes everything, getting that aerial view. So this expansive power takes us away from where we are right now in a relative sense into possibility, into a bigger view. This bigger view has a few qualities to it. One is that from this bigger view, the details become more and more vague. So last week I talked about how, or last week, it wasn't really last week, it was, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, last episode, I should say, I talked about how this like condensing power brings a lot of detail, brings a lot of clarity and differentiation between this and that, as things separate into their specific parts. And, if I zoom in on anything, I start to get details. Oh, that's that, and this is this bit, and so on. When you get the expansion away, you start to get vagueness. You get the big picture, but the details become vague. So, this idea of like getting away from the center of the earth to see the earth as a whole, you stop losing all the details of what's going on for the individual people on earth and just see a whole earth and where it's at. Likewise, if I kind of like zoom out of my life and into the kind of timeline of my whole life, the details of what's going on right now get a little lost, right? If you throw your mind back to details of what happened on some very specific day 15 years ago, you can't really find them. You can get a vague sense of how things went 15 years ago, but you can't really find the details. So as you zoom out, as you get this expansiveness away from the center, you get contact with a bigger picture, yes, but you lose smaller details. You lose this clarity of very, very specific details that separate things and make things very clear. This has its pros and its cons. And like I talked about last week, these two forces are balancing agents for each other. The expansiveness and the condensation don't oppose each other. They don't go to war with each other, or at least they shouldn't. They work to harmonize one another. The openness of the expansion of wood to get this like aerial view is really going to balance the closeness of the condensation of metal. So let's think about this in terms of dreams, right? As I get away from the kind of reality of now, I can also get into this like dream I have, this kind of draw I have to be more than I am, for the world to be better than it is, for me to accomplish something really particular. And this dream, when we're little kids, we have a dream that's maybe something really overly simplistic, like I want to be a fireman, all these typical modern dreams that kids kind of pick up at one point in time. And it's really, the dream isn't there to be a direct indicator of how things are actually going to play out. But the dream does provide direction. It provides an orientation. It provides something to move towards. So the best way I can explain this is that the metal element, the condensation down into a specific individual being here now, I'm sitting on a chair here recording a podcast, is something like if you have a parachute, it's the body sitting in the seat of the parachute, giving it kind of downward anchoring. The dream is like the canopy of the parachute, this expansive, this expansive opening force that provides lift and provides movement. So if we don't have the dream, if we don't have this like growth out, this expansion out of me into something bigger than me, then we lose the canopy, right? We lose that which draws us throughout life, and you just end up like sitting there not doing anything. If the metal element, is condensation element, is just active on its own, it's animalistic, right? It's just about survival. So it's like eat, sleep, drink, reproduce, rinse and repeat and die. It's kind of pointless. It doesn't have much of a point to it. So we need the dream there to counter that, to give us contact with our higher self, with the bigger picture. Like, what are we actually here to do? What are we here to accomplish with this life? How does that accomplishment contribute to the greater landscape of life itself, of this particular moment in time, of this particular culture, and so on and so forth? All the other people around us, our community, whether that community be people or nature or otherwise, wood really provides this sense of greater purpose. So the wood element, I go back to this idea of the parachute. The parachute is there to provide lift and growth and movement, right? Without the chute, you don't go anywhere. It's not that you ever get to the chute, right? I don't ever arrive at the dream. The dream is there to be kind of this etheric, not quite accomplished thing that's drawing me forward. So like the canopy on the parachute, I don't climb up and become the canopy. I'm actually more like the whole thing interacting. I'm the canopy, this kind of etheric dream of, something being better than I am, and I'm also sitting back in the reality of the limitations of where I am right now, which is the condensation and metal element. And the dream, being more yang in nature than yin, is subject to change, right? I could say, have this dream of, I'll give you actually a personal example. I had this dream of running this kung fu school with alternative physical education and all of this. And as I started to pursue that dream, the first thing I did was become a personal trainer. And I did like a year of that. And I was like, oh, that's not it. And the dream shifted. And I was like, oh no, I have to train this other stuff. And so I went into natural movement and whatever else. I'm like, this is close. This is probably it. But then I started training in Taoism and I was like, oh, the natural movement isn't it either. The Taoism thing, that must be the actual dream. And then, I went through the whole period of being in the Taoist school, and then I left the Taoist school, and it's like, oh, that wasn't the dream either. The dream shifted. So in all these different periods of my life, I still had this greater, like, loose idea of teaching some sort of alternative education thing. And there is still in there somewhere the dream of, like, maybe having a facility one day where these kind of things get taught. I don't know if that will unfold, but that idea, that dream kind of drags me in a very particular way, to make efforts right now, to try things right now, to fail at certain things right now. And inevitably, it's not going to turn out the way I envision it right now. It's going to adapt and adjust as time unfolds, but I still need it. I still need it, but I need to not be kind of um, obsessed with it. I need to be connected to it, but I don't want to climb up out of my pilot seat, sitting in where I am at the moment, and try and exist only as a canopy. The canopy without the pilot just flaps around in the wind and goes nowhere, and just gets, thrown around by the winds of time and change. So I still need to sit firmly in where I'm at right now, but I also need to be connected to this bigger picture of, oh, it could be more than this. And so as this relationship settles, the dream becomes very clear as both a, oh, that's what I'm growing towards at the moment, and understanding that the dream can and usually will change as certain events unfold. One of the when I was kind of connecting into this a few years ago, I was still in the Taoist school. I just had this like, oh, is it we're going to be like, I'm going to be an instructor in this school and a disciple maybe, and all of this, and it was all a bit like tentative and unsure. And then of course I went through everything. I went and I left the school, and that was part of like a shift of the winds, right? The sail of that dream had achieved its goal. It had taken me through the school and made me do this training and all the rest. And then I didn't need it anymore for whatever purpose my life is here for. And so it shifted and drew me out of the school. So this is that sense of being connected to something bigger than me, because when you're connected out to the dream, it really feels like there's this higher force, higher power kind of governing things. And, that higher power is part of who I am. It's not something separate to me. It's part of who I am, but it's like, it's not part of who I am as a mundane, animal. It's something more etheric than that. It's not like I can go to a hospital and like cut myself open and find that higher self somewhere. It's not that at all. But the connection to it provides this draw towards certain things. And so, as I stay connected to this dream has this tendency to kind of shift and change, and, certain things appear, and it's like, is that a door I need to go through? I don't know. And then sometimes you step through a particular door and it's like, oh, cool. That's actually a piece of this dream. And the more you stay connected to it, the more it's quite mysterious, but it definitely has this feeling of like a power, a greater power that's leading you through this journey that is life, and it's providing little clues and hints, and sometimes you bungle it and sometimes you don't. But it's definitely this feeling of something bigger than you. Now, this is directly related, I think, to this sense. Well, I mean, also in the classical theory of this thing, the wood energy, this expansive energy, is directly related to not just dreams, but the concept of a deity, the concept of these greater powers that are connected to our life, that kind of govern our life, that give us our drive and our sense of what we're here for. And one of the things we see in the modern world is that people don't have a connection to the greater anymore. Lots and lots and lots of people are like agnostic or atheist or just don't have a belief structure and just haven't even thought about it. And it tends to be that in the world in general, there's a lot more frustration as well. You don't have a sense of belonging anymore when you don't have a connection to something greater. Now, that greater thing doesn't have to be a very specific religious greater, but even something like a lineage, right? A lot of traditional cultures have this sense of belonging to this long line of people who have done the same thing, and they're helping initiate you into continuance of that line. And that gives you a sense of purpose and belonging and direction. It's like, right, I'm participating in this thing and I'm going to help with this culture. And you know, the initiations often reveal at least part of the clues of the directions for those kind of cultures. But in modern culture, and personally speaking, right, I don't have a long lineage. I come from a local family where, like, it was basically not spoken about when I was little. We had basic, I think there were like Protestant teachings at my primary school, and at some point there was an option not to participate, and so I just said, "Yeah, I don't want to participate in that," and I became like part of this like silent reading, atheistic, agnostic group. And I don't ever remember my parents doing anything particularly religious or spiritual or talking about it, or even at best, it was kind of laughed at in some jokes around the house. But as I grew older, and particularly as I got into Taoism, I got like into this idea of a bigger power, and was initiated in a couple of ways into certain connections with this bigger power, and that has since grown. And I realized that before that there was this kind of like aimless drifting. There was still a little sense of a vague dream, but it was just an aimless drifting. I was in this public service job that I hated, but I was just doing the grind that everyone else was doing, and there was just no sense of where it was going, what the point of it was for, or anything like that. It was just doing it because that's what you did to survive, right? So it comes back to this more animalistic thing, more of the metal element and of what's called the Po, the corporeal soul in the Taoist traditions. And so as I got more connected to this Hun idea, to this greater dream, it starts to be like something like a connecting to, whether you call it your higher self or your guardian angel or your deity, or just the dream you have for something bigger in your life, in a simple sense, connecting to this and letting this be the sail that draws you through your life, letting this be this kind of inspiration that brings you to where you're at. And it doesn't always have to be like rationally crystal clear. Sometimes there's been plenty of times where I've just been like, this doesn't seem rational at all, but there's just this pull in this particular direction. And I'm just going to, for lack of a better word, like sit back in my little saddle and let the sail draw me through it and kind of follow the winds of change, if you will. Now, what I found is the more the condensing element became clear, the more the expansive element was free to expand a little bit more fully, maybe. So you could think of, again, this parachute metaphor is really, really good, because this condensation, this heaviness, and this density and this weight sits in the passenger seat, right? And with that weight, that downward pull actually helps to open the canopy. If that's not heavy enough, if that's not downward enough and not dense enough, and if it's kind of floaty, then the canopy will be loose. It won't be drawn tight, and so it won't catch the wind properly. So to have this expansiveness open up, you really need more condensation. And the more you get condensed, the more you can expand kind of maybe safely, or maybe stably is a right word, because it's not, there's no safety here. It's a, life isn't an inherently safe thing. We're all going to die. But it gives us a connection to this bigger picture. And so, one thing really interesting happens when you're really connected to this sense of bigger picture. You get this sense of, oh, I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to be doing. It's leading somewhere. I don't know where. And that's what this life is about. This life is about this, like, surfing or sailing through these particular pathways to achieve something that's not actually for the purpose of the animal. The animal's like the vehicle through which it gets achieved, but the animal is certainly going to die, right? That's one thing we can guarantee, that the condensed matter aspect dies at one point. But this whole experience that we call life then gets folded into the greater experience of life and has its uses for this time. It's kind of like the butterfly effect idea. You don't know what a little word said to a stranger right now, or an action taken right now, might inspire them to inspire their child to do something very particular that totally changes the world. And you played a pivotal role in that. And if you weren't in your position at that point in time, that greater story wouldn't play out. So this connection to the greater, this opening, is really, really super crucial. And part of what it does is it gives a sense of empathy. So as you open out past the physical constraints of the limited self into the etheric, less constrained dream world where anything's possible and you can do it if you put your mind to it, this kind of dreamlike idea, which really, down in the Poe and the animal part, is nonsense, right? You can't do anything you put your mind to. You can only do very specific things that are open to you. So if you connect to this bigger picture, but it gives you this sense of oh yeah, I can't do anything, but I can do the very specific thing that I'm here for. I can accomplish the dreams that I'm here for. Now, this opening really, it's necessary that it goes beyond the boundary of the known, right? You have to reach out to the edge of the periphery of the known where things are getting vague already, and then beyond that periphery into the mystery. And when that opening out past the periphery extends and connects into the mystery, then you're really in it, right? Then you'll really let the mystery kind of help the dream along. And because it's mysterious and it can change, you stop being so fixated on why isn't the dream occurring already, which is actually this anger and frustration that comes from the constraint of not being able to connect. And you go, oh, the dream is actually unfolding already. It's just not unfolding the way I think it should be. So instead of going to war with it, I go into harmony with it. Okay, where am I at the moment? What's the sense of the dream right now? This kind of vague pull in this direction. Okay, these are the things I apparently have to work on now. Who knows if it's actually going to work? So many of the things little projects I've had, I'm like, oh, this must be the main thing that's going to, make my business take off or make my practice go deeper or whatever. And it's usually like, I could safely say that 80% of the time that was garbage. That was just like wishful thinking on my behalf. And then there are these really little moments that seem inconsequential at the time that actually were the huge door that opened into something marvelous and something wonderful and some big unexpected change. So the more you navigate that change, the more you get the sense of, oh, right, I'm opening to this dream expansive world. I'm opening into the unknown, so the doors of potential that need to open for me can open. If I contract too tightly on the image of the dream as it's showing right now, right now I've got this kind of sense of, oh, maybe I need to make more of the course material that I'm making, or maybe I need to work towards a facility. If I contract too tightly around that and that's not actually where I'm going, then when it tries to change, I won't let it. And I'll be like, kind of like in this frustration because it's meant to be the thing. It's meant to be more courses and it's meant to be the facility, and I can't. And it's trying to pull me somewhere else and expand and grow in a different direction, and it's being constrained in this frustration. Whereas if it's open into possibility, I can like fly towards the facility today, or the dream of a better selection of courses or whatever's not here yet, but kind of I'm working towards. And then the moment the winds of change go like, yeah, that's cool, but tomorrow I meet someone who's like, actually, I'm giving you an offer to do this. And I can just, go, oh, right. I needed to do the courses and the like kind of think about the facility and make movements towards that for this door to open. And now this door is open. I can go through it and go in a completely different direction. So, you know, my little sail worked well. And then the winds changed and the sail moved with the wind, and the dream adapts and adjusts. And I still remain in harmony. I get to kind of surf on the winds rather than trying to punch them and battle them to death. Now, on a very local level, this kind of opening power, what it does is, first of all, just in a really rudimentary way, this expansion from the center outwards puts me in contact with more of my system, more of my body, more of my flesh, and in particular, more of the network that in Taoist systems is called the Huang, might be loosely translated as the fascia or the sinews or the tendinomuscular system. It doesn't really translate so cleanly, but let's say the network of structural tension across the system. And part of that will connect you with open you to, as you expand, you get to know, okay, there's actually all these problems here. There's tension, there's old injuries, whatever. If that is where you stop, then the opening really, again, it'll get constrained. Whereas if you can relax that opening and let it go past what is into possibility, then all of a sudden, all of those problems could change at any moment. It could be today's the day where it releases, right? It could be that it just needed this particular sequence of events right now to release. And again, you don't know. Or maybe it's got to wait another 5 years to release. One of the more curious things that happened to me, I was working on my personal structures and on my particular blockages and whatever in my practice. And when I was in the Taoist school, there was like certain structures that just no matter which technique and which tool I hit them with, and which fancy releasing process I got to work on them, they just didn't move. And it wasn't until I left the school that they finally released and started integrating. So there's this sense of, trying to force things towards the dream is pointless. Like, part of me connecting to those structures is like, okay, those structures are a bit tight now. There's this dream of them being no longer tight, being kind of open and integrated and all the rest. But that dream needed certain things to happen in time. It needed me to leave the school, for one. That was one of the big ones. And it's like, oh, and then those structures open up and then they connect more thoroughly and whatever else. So I'm not saying this to say that if you're part of a school, you need to leave that school too. Not at all. It was just my particular circumstances where this was the case. But it's really there to show you that if the dream is really stuck, if I was too fixated on how do I fix that particular small problem, and not connecting out to the bigger picture that's going on, this change of rhythm that was coming in my life. And, the rhythm actually, in retrospect, was very, very obvious. There was this like build up, and then there was this slow letdown, and then the release, and then boom, out of the school. And it happened in a way that I couldn't have contrived in a million years. It was just life, the bigger picture, the gods, maybe, whatever word you want to use for that. Something bigger than us. My guardian angel was guiding me. My higher self was directing me, whatever. That needed to play out in that particular way before that smaller stuff could release. And interestingly enough, as I passed that particular threshold in my life, there was this like, oh, right, I can sit down and being me. And also the dream became clearer. It's like, okay, cool. Well, I'm able to sit down in myself more as a relative human with my particular set of problems and limitations. But at the same time, the dream became clear, and it's like, oh, the dream's like getting to this almost like inevitable stage. It's like, oh, it's connected and it's going somewhere, and I don't know where it's going, but it's definitely going. It's definitely going and it's definitely connected. So this expansive power connects to all of this. And the more this opening occurs, the wood energy in the Taoist cosmology is also related to both the liver and the gallbladder. And so the liver has a few connections. It's not just talking about the Western liver as in the organ, it's a system, an energetic system in the body. And one of the main functions it has is ensuring the free circulation of energy. And as this sense of like possibility opened up, it's like, oh, I'm not just constrained to being in the school, there are other possibilities. Then the system is like, oh, there's way more free circulation now. There's way more possibility. There's way more movement. And a lot of things got happier. The gallbladder often gets related to courage. And my view on this is the courage comes from being on the path you're meant to be on, even if that's a mystery. So you can have the courage to like step into the mystery, and that might all not always go well for the animal, right? There's so many of these kind of ideas of courage often involve sacrifice of the animal for the greater good. The first one that comes to mind is William Wallace and the Braveheart story, right? That's still inspiring people to this day through the movie, through the story, through the myth of what happened on that day in that war. It's still inspiring thousands and thousands of people, and though the animal, and the particular scenes are long gone, because there was courage there was service to a greater story. And this is something I think we really lost in the West. I quite liked watching, there was this show just recently called Shogun, I think, and it was about the kind of Japanese shogunate era of things. And in that culture at the time, there would be these people that would do ritual suicide. And from a Western perspective, that's bonkers. But from their perspective, it's like, no, I'm in service to a greater good here. I'm suiciding for a particular reason. And there was one character in that show who was like the general's second. And he ended up raising this, like a protest against what the general was doing and committing suicide in protest. And it turned out that that was all part of their big kind of art of war chess play, that because he did that, they thought the general was losing it. And then they underestimated him. And then he made this maneuver and he actually took over the whole thing. And it's like, and then like in retrospect, the general knew that his first was actually on board with everything and made that sacrifice to serve this, from their perspective, greater good to become the shogun of the whole thing. So that's it's an extreme example, but it's like giving the tone. We're going to die, right? That's inevitable. It's what we do with that time that's kind of more important. And is that time in service to a greater good, or is it just in service to survival of the animal? If you're in the latter and you have no expansion into the bigger picture, or you've got like this fixated expansion on one particular idea, then it can be very, very, not nice life, a very angry, frustrated life that can escalate into more and more frustration and more anger the more there's constraint on the dream. Whereas if there's this more openness to the dream, then the dream is free to appear how it needs to appear and change how it needs to change. This also talks to dealing with the imaginal, because when you reach out of where I physically am and I open to what's beyond me, one of the first things you run into is the imaginal world, what's called the invisible world or the subtle world or the spirit world in many, many different systems. And in this realm, because we're kind of connected to it via this vague, dreamlike, imaginal world, what we often try to do, especially as modern Western practitioners engaging with this world for the first time, perhaps, is we put constraints on that world based on how we think it should be. which is usually based on stories we've heard in movies or popular culture. And when that constraint is put on there, that world has a kind of frustrated connection, and we have a frustrated connection with it. It's too constrained, it's too limiting. Whereas when that constraint is taken away and those forces are free to kind of mold themselves, and not only mold themselves, but change that mold, and even change the whole tone of the interaction, then they're free. They're free, and there's possibility for them to shift and change. So you can have, I don't know, let's use a silly example that's super, super common. Loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of people say they're connected to the Archangel Michael. If you're super, super, super convinced that it's the Archangel Michael, then that constrains that interaction to having to appear in a particular way. And if you're kind of bound by the pop culture version of that, then it's probably like this being that's kind of like angelic, that has the wings and maybe the armor and the sword and whatever else. But if that interaction with that power, when you open into that imaginal realm, is actually, you open past the appearance to the possibility of the appearance adjusting and changing depending on the context, then it may appear and continue to appear in that particular way, or it may shift and appear in a complete other way. Maybe it just appears as a bird. The winged idea is still there, but it's a very different winged idea. Or maybe it's just a random blob of force, right? Maybe it's something else entirely. And having that freedom for those things to appear in the way that they want to appear will actually let those forces contact you in a much more effective way. And often that means that it doesn't at all appear like the textbook or the teaching you're following says it should appear. Maybe it just comes through as a commentary in your head, or maybe it's just a kind of vibe or an intellectual knowing, and doesn't end up at all as this kind of like imagistic image thing that people talk about. Maybe your friend said for them, contact with this greater force came through as seeing auras on people, and you're like, why don't I see auras? And if you're sitting there trying to see auras, you actually constrain the possibilities of how these energies can interact with you. If you're sitting there with any belief structure, actually, to some degree, that belief structure will constrain you. Now, I'm not saying don't have a structure of interaction here. If you belong to a tradition and the tradition has for a long time done it a particular way, it's pretty wise to follow that way. But even so, at some point, how do you know you're not the first person who's going to see it in a different way? How do you know you're not a catalyst of change for that lineage and tradition? You don't, right? And this is what opening to the possibilities is about. You take the notion, it's described like this and this and that, but then you open past that notion into the realm of possibility and mystery, and then that this and this and that might stay the same, or it might change. And it's not that it's being changed based on your kind of immature notions of how it's meant to be. The opening actually frees it to change in whatever way it wants to change. So the agency and the control leaves your small mind and is more like, let's say life is free to change itself how it will, or God is free to communicate with you in whatever way it sees fit, as, you being a kind of subject of God, or you being a subject of life, or whatever word you want to use. I'm not too big on being stuck on particular words to describe this stuff. So when the opening is there, possibility is there. And because possibility is there, the dream can like shape up in whatever way it needs to shape up. It doesn't actually have to be limited to a particular way. At the same time as this unlimited possibilities kind of shapes itself up however it is now, it's always free to adjust how it's shaped at any moment. You might just go down and have a conversation with someone and somehow it's like, oh, eureka, that's actually clarified the dream and is actually like this. But if in that eureka moment you get really fixated on it having to be like this, and you don't go, oh, that's like that, but it's still the possibilities, the open possibilities is still there, then it's still free to like immediately have another conversation where that changes yet again. So this is the realm of open limitations, right? When you're opening beyond yourself to something more than yourself. Now, the problem with this realm is if you spend too long in this like vague dream world where, dream forces line up and whatever, and you don't have enough anchoring in the limited relative world, then it can get like unhinged really quickly. Your dreams can change. You can be so convinced of truths, but truths are being dreamlike. If you've ever had a dream where you are definitely in your family home, but it looks nothing like your family home that you grew up in, but you're definitely in the family home. This is the realm of that world. The archetypal forces are definitely like not following rational rules of the kind of relative world. So you need to sit back and anchor yourself in the rational rules of the relative world at the same time as be connected to the open sail of the dream. Um, and this wood energy is talking to this open sail. Again, in a physical sense, it's the opening and stretching of the tissues. And you can even think as the membranes of the body getting this like sail like openness, right? As the sail inflates, it kind of like stretches apart, but it interconnects and it works in harmony. It's not too forced. It's actually very soft. And it's the softness that allows it to open. But it's open, right? It's not collapsed and it's not drawn rigid. It's just open and full. And part of what helps it to open is the condensation and the sitting down in the dense center that we talked about in the previous podcast. So again, these two forces work together, but we need to make sure that we understand either side of these forces and the nature of those forces. And this is where yin-yang theory can be really useful, right? The center, the density, the manifestations of the relative world are the yin aspect that have this kind of heaviness and density that in this metaphor is like the passenger sitting down in the seat and knowing where they are. And the yin changes slowly and all the rest. Then you have the yang, which is the open field of possibilities, that is the sail, that gives a sense of a bigger picture, that gives visibility, that also gives a vagueness, right? When you get too far away from something, when you separate yourself from something and get far away, then there's a vaguity, just like the astronaut getting too far away from Earth. And you think if that astronaut got further and further away from Earth, Earth would kind of become this like just little dot and then eventually would disappear. And there's not even an Earth there and there's outer space. It's like if you go too far into that realm, you would just become uninterested in what's going on in the mundane world. You would just be like totally disconnected and out there somewhere and not at all in here. And that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in this balance between being right down in here and simultaneously open to what's that kind of like bigger picture and that potential. So to work on this potential, it's really about opening past the relative happenings of now through to that kind of mysterious dream world, and then beyond that to the open potential that is beyond the dream world. So the dream world can then take its shape, but being yang and ethereal, it like appears for a moment like this, and then it can change, and it can change, and it can change whenever it wants. It's not constrained. At the same time, it's connected to the limitations of the relative physical world of the yin side of things. And you can always flip them around and say the material world seems like the obvious visible place, so that's more yang, and the subtle world is more hidden and more concealed and more shadow like, so that's more yin. This is the fun part of yin and yang theory, is that the context always makes or breaks it. So yeah, but generally speaking, I like to think of the expansiveness out past what is to what might be, into the realm of dreams and archetypal forces and deities kind of looking down on our life going, that little human needs to get from there to there in the scheme of things. And if you don't have that, you're essentially going to have this feeling of being constrained and being frustrated with what's the point of being here. Um, Pragmatically speaking, what you can do to connect to this bigger picture. Well, first of all, if you've not done if you're like a staunch atheist or agnostic, just taking some time each day to sit down and give yourself like 15 minutes to kind of ruminate about what might possibly be bigger than you is a really, really good idea. You know, you can do things like let your mind drift to mythology that you really enjoyed as a child, because often the dreams are more obvious in children. They get kind of shut down as adults meet the harsh reality of surviving in the modern world. Um, and that's fair enough, right? The the animal, needs to survive. But you can then bring your mind back to this, like open your mind to what mythologies did you really like as a kid? Were you really drawn to ancient Egypt, or did you like the Romans, or did you like the Greeks, or are you a bit more taken by some sort of indigenous variation of these things? You know, whatever. Just let your mind open to the potentials, right? What's there? What's kind of, and don't let it fixate, right? If you just jump on the first thing and close on that, then you're closing the possibilities. It's no longer opening out from the center. And to do this a little bit every day is really a very good thing. At the same time, it's a good idea to train the physical aspects of opening from the center out to the extremities very physically and opening up all the tissues, opening up all the membranes. It's a super, super good idea to do that. The wood expansive element has an association with the eyes. For those of you who are on my Patreon and listening to this kind of near to when it gets released, there was a Patreon we just did recently that was all about training the opening and the releasing of the eyes, and that can really help a lot of this. Again, I don't think it's a coincidence that most people in the world have lost their belief structures. Most people's vision is also so trash that we need glasses and things like that. So something to consider. What else? Non-dual training is very, very good for this. Opening to the infinite, changeless, eternal now, this outer context from which all the relative moments are arising within. That's also very, very good way to find this spaciousness. And in general, just getting some spaciousness in your life. Like if you spend your days in a constrained room and then you go into a constrained car and then you drive to your constrained office job and you stay in that constrained time and then you drive in your constrained car back to your constrained home, and the only kind of opening you have is watching the TV and letting your imagination work with the show, just physically take some time as regularly as possible to like go out into an open field somewhere and just be around some open spaces, or climb to a top of a nearby, if there's a small mountain near you that has a walk to the top, just climb and just go to the lookout and get that aerial view of your little town or your little city. At least that, right? That's a very kind of simplified version of this opening, getting the aerial view, getting the bigger picture, but it will help, right? It'll help settle that frustration and help connect you to something bigger. If you can do that and get up to the top of the lookout and look out over your town and go, whoa, they're like little town, looks like little ants from up here. And then let your imagination wander a bit, just open the possibilities of the imagination and just sit there like kind of leaning into the imaginal forces that may be governing the little ants there, and lean into the imaginal forces that may be that wide open space of sky above the town there. And, look at the hills and stuff around you and just, lean into the imaginal forces that might animate those hills, that has that very slow, like undulation over time. If you looked at that hill in a fast forward over 1,000,000 years, it would kind of undulate and move as the ground changed and the tectonic plates move and all of this. And lean into how alive that is, even though from our perspective it's a bit too slow to kind of notice. One of the best versions I had of this, I went to Yosemite National Park, and there's a particular lookout there where you can see the movement of the glacier. And from that perspective, it just looks like a snail or a worm has just like moved through this region very quickly and just left this trail behind it. And you can kind of see where the glacier is. And you're like, oh, there's the glacier right there. And here's the path it's just walked. It's just kind of over several million years, kind of just trudged through the valley and left a little trail of a valley behind it. And it's from that perspective, you're like, whoa. And particularly if you have a good guide, they'll tell you the story of how the glacier changed and shifted and moved through the valley. But from that lookout, you can see it. You can see the path it's taken over like unfathomable amounts of time relative to my shitty office job that I've only been doing for 10 years, right? It's unfathomable, but you can see it. And when you connect, you get that sense of, whoa, there's more going on than my 9 to 5. Oh, okay, cool. And you very quickly get the sense of how modernity really doesn't like this bigger picture, because if you're connected to the bigger picture, you might not show up at your shitty job that you hate. You might not show up the next day. You might go do something more useful with your life. Not to say that there aren't people who don't belong in those corporate environments. Some people really have a dream to change the world through those avenues, and that's fine. But if that's not your dream and it's frustrating you, then see if you can open to a sense of possibility. You don't have to take silly risks, right? You still need to sit in the condensed metal side of things that realizes, okay, I need to pay bills and whatever else. But if you're connected to the dream, you might use that more strategically. I had a friend when I used to work in the office who was just like, I know exactly why I'm here. I want to live on a farm. And if I work in the public service for 10 years, I'm going to earn a buttload of money and I can use that to buy my farm and set it up the way I want. And he did that. And then he just quit after 10 years. And now he lives on a farm and actually is living the life he dreamed of, and he loves it. So it can be that, right? It doesn't have to be utopian in nature. Utopian ideals often show up when you're disconnected from the condensation of the relative world. When you're just living in the dream, there's always this like, it should be better than this, and why isn't it better than this? And I'm just angry about how it's not better than this. That's that kind of like untethering from the condensation that causes that utopian movement that you see a lot in the world today, right? People are disconnected from what is, and so the dream gets this very like frustrated energy about them. Whereas if you sit back into what is and then open from there to the possibilities, then it's like, I don't actually know what windows are going to appear at any moment. And if I'm sitting in what is and not getting consumed by this one particular dream of how it should be better than it is, then I open the possibilities of change, and then I can actually make some sort of effective change in the world. I can live the meaning of my life effectively. I can do what's mine to do in the world, and I can do it with awe and with joy and with exuberance. And just as a side note, that I just stole that last phrase, "What's mine to do," from Gordon from Rune Soup. He talks a bit about that, and I quite like that podcast. And Gordon's doing some really interesting work in the imaginal, magical, animistic, occult side of the world. So check out Rune Soup if you have some time, and it might help you find an avenue to open to something bigger than yourself. All right, I think I'm just gonna leave that there. That was, as I do with all my podcasts, I just have the kind of vague topic and I sit down and I hit record and just let, the dream's there for the podcast, but I don't quite know how it's going to unfold. And so I have the dream, and then there's the moment to sit down, and then I just sit into it and let it come out. And it's been working a lot better when I do that than if I kind of constrain how it's meant to come out with a plan and a script and all the rest. It's not my style. So hopefully you've enjoyed this. Hopefully you've got something from it, and I will see you next time. Take care.